9 years after announcing they'd be turning the 2013 video game The Last of Us into a movie, Sony is finally bringing the scary survival horror game to HBO. The show will follow Joel, a rugged black market smuggler tasked to escort Ellie, a young girl who carries a rare immunity against the virus plaguing the world, across a post-apocalyptic United States to the militant revolutionary group known as the Fireflies. Let's dive in. First up, Sony released a BTS video from the show teasing a heartbreaking Joel Miller moment. The featurette includes all new footage of the upcoming TV adaptation and features Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann, as well as stars Pedro Pascal as Joel Miller and Bella Ramsey as Ellie. The video shows the actors discussing a devastating moment for Joel early in the season, with Pedro describing the loss of his character's daughter, Sarah, played by Nico Parker, as the event that shapes the character for the rest of his life. We know that the show is going to be changing a few aspects of the game to better adapt to the television medium, but the trailers we've seen so far have teased the inclusion of several major plot points, including Sarah's death. Neil Druckmann, the game's creator, has shared a new still from the upcoming series that offers a detailed look at the titular character's daughter right before her death. Just that will have you bawling your eyes out if you know what's coming. So now we know that Sarah will be as crucial in the story as she was in the game. Very early on in the game, the fungal infection that eventually causes the apocalypse starts to spread rapidly, leading to complete chaos as the community seeks to protect itself from the infected and prevent an outbreak. Even though Joel and Sarah are able to escape the infected, a soldier is eventually ordered to shoot them to contain the infection. He fires once before Joel's brother Tommy kills him, but the damage had been done by that point. Sarah dies in Joel's arm despite his attempt to save her. This is a pivotal scene in the game because it allows the player to connect with Joel and Sarah's relationship and understand why Joel turns into the jaded, carefully guarded man we see him become later in the game. Even though much of The Last of Us hinges on the relationship between Joel and Ellie and is set 2 whole decades after Sarah's death, losing his daughter permanently marks Joel's character and affects many of his future choices and actions. We know that Sarah is going to be dying in the HBO series as well, but we think they can take her character a step further, incorporating more flashbacks of Joel's time with her in order to flesh out her character and make viewers really feel the impact of her loss more heavily. But essentially, the narrative meaning behind Joel's devastating loss will remain the same as it is in the game. Let's talk a bit more about how Sarah's death defines Joel's character. Although not seen in the original game, Joel reveals at a later point that he went into a dark place after his daughter's death. He started stealing from others and killing those who got in his way, which ultimately led to his brother deserting him and joining the Fireflies. His fateful meeting with Ellie churns up emotions he hadn't felt since prior to his daughter's death. As the duo trek cross-country in search of the Fireflies, Joel and Ellie form a bond that only a father and daughter can have. In that sense, the pain of Sarah's death ends up dragging Joel down into the depths of despair, but also allows him to later be open to developing a close relationship with Ellie. When you know the entire backstory of these characters, that BTS footage hits a lot harder. With The Last of Us premiering on the 15th of January 2023, audiences don't have to wait much longer to see the heartbreaking moment play out on their screens. We recommend keeping a box of tissues on hand. Here's more of what we know about the show. While the show will most likely follow the plot of the first game, it's also expected to incorporate elements from The Last of Us Part 2, which is set 5 years after the first game. That said, it seems more likely that they'll put in a few elements from The Last of Us Left Behind, a more Ellie-centric prequel set before the events of the first game. The series is also expected to expand upon the game's story, including some elements that were previously cut from the game. So they went ahead and decided to make changes that were designed to fill things out and expand rather than undo anything. All in all though, the series seems like it's taking a lot of cues from the game. Both the teaser trailer and the HBO Sizzle trailer released earlier included moments that looked like scenes from the game and even employ the same or similar camera angles. We also know that because of its close ties to the video game, the TV adaptation is limited by its source material. There's always some discrepancies when creators decide to adapt source material like books or video games into movies and TV shows. Each storytelling medium had its own strengths and weaknesses, which is what makes translating across mediums a bit of a challenge. In the case of Game of Thrones, for instance, series creators David Benioff and D.B. Weiss ran out of source material at the end of the 5th season because George R.R. Martin hadn't and still hasn't finished his next novel, The Winds of Winter. This meant that Benioff and Weiss had to write their own ending for the series, and we all know how that went. HBO's adaptation of the video game The Last of Us is similarly limited by its source material, with only 2 games and a DLC storyline currently available to reference. But series creators Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin have found a way around the problem. Here's how The Last of Us series plans to avoid Game of Thrones adaptation issues. The creators of the upcoming series have said that they have no plans of telling any stories beyond adapting the games, which is why they don't think they'll run into the same issue as Game of Thrones. And since The Last of Us Part 2 doesn't end on a cliffhanger, they don't have to sit waiting in hopes of a new part for the game either. Druckmann and Mazin haven't outright said that the second season of The Last of Us will follow the story of the second game, but they have hinted at the fact that Season 2 will at least start exploring the stories that's told in the video game sequel. Mazin mentioned that he's not a big fan of filler in TV shows, going on to say that he doesn't have any interest in a spinning plates go on forever show, and that he doesn't plan on turning it into a perpetual motion machine. Provided that they do adapt Part 2 into a potential second season, the creators seem prepared to end the series after telling that story. Either that or wait for another game to adapt rather than continue the story separate from the games. Given how much hate Game of Thrones got for its final season, it makes complete sense for Druckmann and Mazin to want to be a little careful with their project and avoid changing things up too drastically. Even though they've already talked about changing certain things from the game, they've also said that that doesn't mean they'll be coming up with entirely new stuff. They'll simply be enhancing what they already have to work with. We think The Last of Us is already off to a pretty good start, since they're already set on avoiding the problems that Game of Thrones made. To start, co-creator Craig Mazin's critiques on the original Game of Thrones pilot is what led to Benioff and Weiss reshooting it. So that just proves how seriously he takes adaptations, even when they aren't his own. Also, while the Game of Thrones co-creators didn't include source creator George R.R. Martin in the creative process for the last few seasons, The Last of Us series co-creator Neil Druckmann also just happens to be the creative director for the video game. So we're expecting the series to be a pretty faithful adaptation for however long the series ends up running. Finally, we're prepared to expect The Last of Us to be bigger and better than Game of Thrones. There have been reports of the budget for the upcoming series being more than that of various seasons of Game of Thrones, proving just how promising the series might be and just how much faith HBO Max has in the show. While this shines a positive light on the show, it also adds a pretty big responsibility on the creator's shoulders. Something that GOT suffered from was its increasing dependency on the budget for CGI and a focus on its characters, a balance that was managed pretty well for the first few seasons, but was thrown off by the last few. By the end, the focus began to shift from what the books had established, and the story and characters were no longer a priority. The creators became too focused on utilizing their bigger budget on better animation, which led to lesser attention being paid to character development. And once again, we know how that ended. With a reportedly larger budget, The Last of Us runs the risk of facing the same issues, but we think it'll avoid that kind of downfall because the series creators all seem to be committed to staying true to the original story. The show, from what we've seen so far, offers a lot in terms of designs and locations, focusing on a post-apocalyptic world filled with zombies. This will allow for a more interactive experience since viewers are going to recall locations that they encountered within the game. The budget will give more room for the zombies and other creatures to stand out in already established locations that we're confident are going to be super mesmerizing. That's a wrap for this video. Do you think the series is going to be able to do justice to the story from the game? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.